In the quiet suburbs of Seattle, where lawns were neatly trimmed and mailboxes gleamed with uniform perfection, Daniel Carter's home looked like the embodiment of stability. He was 33 then, a mechanical engineer working for a mid-sized firm downtown, and his wife Melissa was the face of charm and confidence, a marketing executive with the kind of beauty that made neighbors whisper and husbands look twice. They had 4 children, Liam, Emma, Noah, and little Grace. A picture-perfect family that could have been the cover of a holiday card. From the outside, nothing seemed broken. But perfection, Daniel would later learn, was only the calm before a storm. Every morning followed a rhythm. Daniel brewed coffee, packed lunches, and helped Liam with his homework before heading to the garage. Melissa's perfume trailed behind her as she rushed out in heels, phone glued to her ear, always saying she was late for a client meeting. Daniel admired her drive, or at least he used to, but recently her smile felt practiced, her voice distant, as if her body was in the house while her mind lived somewhere else. At night, she stared into her phone, laughing at texts Daniel never saw. When he asked, she said it was just office banter. He wanted to believe her. For years he did. The year was 2014. The recession had hit hard, and Daniel's company announced layoffs. He was one of them. The news shattered him quietly. He came home that evening carrying a cardboard box filled with 12 years of his career. Photo frames, a coffee mug, a few tools, and his dignity. Melissa didn't cry or even hug him. She just stood there, frozen in the doorway, as if someone had unplugged her emotions. "We'll figure it out," he said softly. "It's temporary." But her silence stretched long enough for him to understand that "we" no longer meant the same thing. Over the next months, Daniel searched for jobs that didn't exist. He mowed lawns, fixed neighbors' appliances, and sold his tools to buy groceries. The bills piled up. Melissa's complaints grew sharper. She began spending nights out, claiming networking events and late meetings. When Daniel once asked why she came home smelling of whiskey and another man's cologne, she exploded. "You think I'm like you? Stuck? Hopeless? I deserve more than this miserable life." The words cut through him, but he didn't yell back. He only looked at her, the woman he'd once carried across their threshold, now a stranger with the same face. One evening after putting the kids to bed, Daniel found Melissa sitting at the kitchen table, her suitcase by her side. "I'm leaving," she said. Her tone was calm, almost rehearsed. "For how long?" he asked. "For good." The words hit him like an invisible punch. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She didn't look at the photos on the wall, of birthdays, vacations, their wedding day, all moments that suddenly meant nothing. "Melissa, they're your children," he whispered. "They'll always be my children," she said. "But I can't do this anymore." He didn't stop her. Maybe part of him knew begging wouldn't change a thing. The door closed quietly, but the echo of that moment would haunt the house for years. The next morning, the kids asked where their mother was. Daniel lied, saying she was away for work, but children sense truth better than adults. Liam stopped asking after a while, but Emma cried herself to sleep for weeks. Noah drew pictures of their mother, always smiling, always far away. Grace, too young to understand, only said, "Mommy's shopping." Daniel carried the weight of 4 hearts that didn't know why they were broken. The neighborhood noticed, of course. Whispers floated across fences. "She left him for that guy from the city," one woman said while watering her plants. Daniel heard but said nothing. He had no time for pride. There were mouths to feed, and time did not pause for heartbreak. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. He worked at a car repair shop during the day, took online courses at night, and fell asleep at the kitchen table, surrounded by open textbooks. There were nights he thought of Melissa, wondering if she ever looked back. But he buried those thoughts. Pain had no room in a life that required survival. The house lost its shine. The walls carried echoes of laughter that no longer existed. Yet somewhere in that silence, something hardened in Daniel, a quiet resolve. He would not let his children inherit his despair. He would rise not for revenge, but for redemption. And slowly, piece by piece, he began to build a new life from the ruins she left behind. 12 years later, people would call it a miracle. But for now, in that dim kitchen where a single bulb flickered over unpaid bills and sleeping children, it was just one man, alone, choosing not to give up. He didn't know it yet, but the same woman who left him in search of a better life would one day stand before him, broken by her own choices, stunned by what he had become. The winter that followed Melissa's departure was the coldest Daniel could remember. The Seattle rain fell for weeks, gray and endless, washing the color out of everything it touched. The house echoed differently now, emptier, lonelier. Melissa's perfume had long faded, leaving behind only the faint smell of detergent and motor oil. Daniel woke every morning before dawn, not because he wanted to, but because his body refused to rest. He'd stare at the ceiling, listening to the quiet breathing of his children in the next rooms, and wonder how a heart could keep beating after being shattered. He didn't tell anyone what happened. At work, he was the guy whose wife traveled for business. At the grocery store, he was the single dad doing his best. He smiled when people said, "You're holding up great," even though every word felt like a lie. But pain, he learned, could be disguised in silence. He became efficient at pretending. His nights were harder. When the kids were asleep, Daniel sat in the dark kitchen with a cup of cold coffee, scrolling through old photos on his phone. Melissa's face glowed on the screen, frozen in laughter, her eyes alive in a way they hadn't been for years before she left. He tried deleting the pictures once, but his finger froze above the trash icon. He couldn't. Not yet. Somewhere between love and hate, there was a space called remembering, and he lived there. Months turned into years. Daniel adjusted, not by choice, but necessity. Liam, the eldest, took on more than a boy should have to, walking his siblings to school, fixing breakfast, pretending he wasn't angry at the world. Emma grew quiet, drawing in her sketchbooks late at night. Noah turned rebellious, fighting boys twice his size. Grace, sweet Grace, asked questions no father should ever have to answer. "Did Mommy forget us?" she once asked, holding her stuffed bear. Daniel hugged her tightly, unable to speak. Forgetting was the wrong word. Abandoning was the truth. Melissa sent postcards at first, brief and impersonal, pictures of beaches, hotels, wine glasses against sunsets. She wrote things like, "Tell the kids Mommy misses them," as if those words could patch what she tore apart. Eventually, even the postcards stopped. Daniel didn't ask why. He had learned to live with absence. One evening, 2 years after she left, he saw her again for the first time. He was refueling his old pickup at a gas station when a black BMW pulled up. Melissa stepped out, wearing sunglasses though the sun was gone, her hair styled, her coat expensive. The man beside her was tall, mid-40s, confident, the kind of man who never had to explain himself. Daniel froze, fuel nozzle in hand. Melissa saw him too, and for a moment neither moved. Then she smiled, small and polite, like greeting an old coworker. "Daniel," she said, her voice soft but detached. "It's been a while." He nodded once. 2 years, he said quietly. The man with her looked impatient. "You ready, babe?" he asked, tossing his card at the cashier. "Babe." The word hit Daniel like a slap. Melissa gave a quick nod, her gaze flickering with discomfort. "You look good," she offered. "Kids are well?" "They're fine," Daniel replied. "They always were." She looked as though she wanted to say something else, but the man returned, keys in hand, and wrapped an arm around her waist. Daniel watched as she let him lead her back into the car, her eyes lowering before the door closed. The engine roared to life, and in seconds they were gone, leaving behind only the smell of expensive fuel in Daniel's hollow chest. That night he didn't sleep. He stood by the window, watching the rain blur the city lights, realizing that the woman he'd loved no longer existed. The betrayal was not just that she had left him for another man. It was that she had erased their history, rewritten herself as someone new. The next morning, Daniel threw away the last of her photos. It wasn't rage, it was survival. He began changing his life piece by piece. He saved every dollar, took extra shifts, enrolled in night classes for renewable energy systems. He told himself it wasn't about revenge. It was about proving to his children that broken didn't mean defeated. Still, in the quiet hours, when exhaustion softened his defenses. He sometimes imagined Melissa looking at the same sky and wondering if she'd made a mistake. But she didn't call. She didn't write. Years passed. Daniel's hard work began to pay off. His small garage business grew into a company specializing in solar installations, hiring veterans and single parents like himself. The Carters, once whispered about with pity, became admired for their resilience. But behind every success, there was still the shadow of betrayal, a scar he carried not with anger, but with quiet strength. Then came the day that would mark the end of illusion forever. Emma, 16, had found his social media post, a photo of Melissa and her rich husband at a CHA. Melissa and her rich husband at a charity gala. She showed it to Daniel, her hands trembling. "She looks happy," Emma said, her voice breaking. Daniel looked at the photo for a long time. Melissa's dress sparkled under chandeliers, her smile radiant. The man beside her held her waist possessively, his eyes smug. Daniel simply said, "Some people look happy when they're lost." He closed the laptop gently, then gathered his children around the dinner table. "We don't need to chase what left us," he told them. "We build what stays." That night, as his children laughed over homemade pasta, Daniel felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Peace. For the first time in years, he no longer needed Melissa's apology. Her betrayal had broken him once, but it also forced him to become the man he was always meant to be. Somewhere out there, she lived behind glass walls of wealth and lies. And one day, when those walls cracked, she would see what she had thrown away. But Daniel wouldn't be waiting. The years that followed were defined not by triumphs, but by the quiet, grinding rhythm of survival. Daniel's life was a clock that never stopped ticking, a series of endless tasks and small sacrifices that blurred one day into another. He woke before dawn to make breakfast for the children, checked their homework, drove them to school, then headed straight to the repair shop where he worked 12-hour shifts under the hum of fluorescent lights. Grease stained his hands and exhaustion shadowed his eyes, but he refused to complain. When the others left at sunset, he stayed behind to study, hunched over a second-hand laptop, learning everything he could about renewable energy systems. His boss, an old mechanic named Roger, once told him, "You're chasing ghosts, kid. Women like that don't come back." Daniel just smiled thinly. "I'm not waiting for her," he said. "I'm waiting for me." Roger didn't understand what that meant, but Daniel did. He wasn't rebuilding to prove something Melissa anymore. He was rebuilding to find the version of himself that had disappeared the night she left. The children grew, and with them, the challenges. Liam turned 16 and started working part-time at a grocery store to help with bills. Emma earned a scholarship to an art summer camp, but almost refused it because she didn't want to leave her father alone. Noah got suspended for fighting after another boy called their mother a slut. Grace, sweet and tender-hearted, began asking more questions, where their mother lived, whether she would ever come home. Daniel answered each question with the same quiet honesty. "I don't know," he'd say, "but we'll be okay either way." And somehow they were. The house was small, but it pulsed with warmth, meals shared on chip plates, laughter echoing between mismatched furniture, birthdays celebrated with homemade cakes. Poverty didn't scare Daniel anymore. Indifference did. Every time he looked at his children, he remembered why he couldn't give up. One particularly hard winter, the shop cut everyone's hours, and Daniel had to deliver pizzas at night to make ends meet. He drove through the rain with the smell of melted cheese clinging to his clothes, counting tips and praying his truck wouldn't break down. Sometimes he'd park near the waterfront, watching the city lights shimmer across the bay, wondering if Melissa ever passed the same place in one of her luxury cars. The thought didn't sting like it used to. Now it only reminded him that he was still standing, still fighting, while she was lost in illusions. He started saving every spare dollar, and by the time Liam left for college, Daniel had enough to rent a small warehouse and register his own business, Carter Solar Solutions. The name sounded ambitious, maybe even naive, but he believed in it. He hired 2 veterans from the neighborhood who couldn't find work elsewhere, and together they built their first system on the roof of a local diner. When the lights turned on, powered by sunlight for the first time, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of control. It wasn't wealth or revenge, it was creation. Life still wasn't easy. There were nights when exhaustion pressed on him like a physical weight, when bills piled higher than contracts, and when doubt whispered that he wasn't enough. But then he'd come home to see Grace asleep on the couch with a school book on her chest, or Noah showing him a project he built in shop class, and all the noise faded. They were his purpose, his proof that love could outlast betrayal. The turning point came unexpectedly. One afternoon, a local news outlet ran a story about small green energy businesses surviving in Seattle's competitive market. Daniel's company was featured, and within weeks he received a flood of new clients. Banks that once rejected him now called to offer loans. People who once pitied him now respected him. He didn't celebrate. He worked harder. Emma designed the company's logo. Liam handled the accounts when home from college, and the younger kids helped pack tools on weekends. The Carters had become a team, yet even amid success, there were moments when the past returned like a shadow. Once, Daniel found an old letter in a box, Melissa's handwriting dated years ago. It said, "Maybe someday you'll understand why I had to leave." He read it once, then tossed it into the fireplace. "I already do," he murmured, watching the flames consume the paper. He didn't hate her anymore. Hate required energy, and his was reserved for living. 12 years of quiet labor transformed him. The lines on his face deepened, but so did the steadiness in his eyes. He no longer flinched when people mentioned Melissa's name. He'd stopped wondering what she was doing, who she was with, or whether she regretted anything. That part of his life had fossilized, still visible, but no longer alive. One evening, as Daniel stood outside the new Carter Solar Solutions office, a modest but proud building with clean glass windows and a blue sign, he realized something remarkable. He had raised 4 children alone, built a business from nothing, and reclaimed his dignity without needing anyone's validation. He didn't owe Melissa an explanation, and he didn't crave her apology. Still, fate had a cruel sense of timing, because somewhere across town, Melissa's own world was beginning to crumble. Her second marriage was falling apart under the same weight of betrayal she once inflicted on Daniel. Her husband had found someone younger, more vibrant, and had quietly moved his assets out of reach. And as she watched her reflection fade in the mirrored walls of her expensive but empty apartment, she would soon learn what Daniel had known for years, that love built on lies always collapses. But for now, Daniel didn't know any of that. He only knew that his children were safe, his business was growing, and for the first time in a decade, he felt something close to joy. The struggle had nearly broken him, but in breaking, it had also refined him. He wasn't the man Melissa left behind anymore. He was someone stronger, quieter, and far more dangerous to the ghosts of his past. The transformation did not happen overnight. It unfolded slowly, like dawn creeping across a weary sky. By the 12th year after Melissa's departure, Daniel Carter had built something solid, something that would have seemed impossible during those first sleepless years of despair. Carter Solar Solutions had grown from a one-man operation in a rented warehouse into a respected regional company with 20 employees and government contracts. His name appeared in local business articles, not as a tragic story of abandonment, but as an emblem of perseverance. Yet Daniel remained the same at his core, humble, calm, and grounded in the routines that had once kept him sane. Every morning he still woke before sunrise, brewed black coffee, and watched the light stretch across the Seattle skyline. The silence that had once haunted him now soothed him. It reminded him of how far he'd come. The house, too, had changed. What was once worn and cluttered was now warm and alive. Family photographs lined the staircase. Liam in his white coat at the hospital, Emma holding her architectural models, Noah at his robotics competition, and Grace beaming in her college sweatshirt. They were grown now, independent, each one a reflection of Daniel's quiet strength. They no longer asked about their mother. It wasn't bitterness that silenced them. It was peace. Daniel sometimes caught himself studying their faces, wondering how he had managed to keep them intact when everything else had fallen apart. He knew the answer, though. Love and the refusal to let pain define them. On the company's 10th anniversary, the mayor invited Daniel to a sustainability conference to speak about small business resilience. Standing on stage in a crisp gray suit, Daniel spoke softly but with conviction about struggle, loss, and faith. He didn't mention Melissa by name, but his words carried the weight of her ghost. People often think failure destroys you, he said to the audience of entrepreneurs, but it can also be the beginning of who you're meant to become, if you let it. When he finished, the crowd stood and applauded. He smiled politely, but as he stepped off the stage, he felt a strange hollowness inside. Success, he realized, was quieter than he'd imagined. It didn't fill the empty places. It simply built new rooms around them. Still, Daniel wasn't lonely. His children visited often, and the house was rarely silent for long. On weekends, the Carters gathered for dinner, home-cooked meals, old jokes, music playing softly in the background. These were the moments Daniel cherished most. The warmth, the laughter, the ease that money could never buy. And yet, deep inside, a faint ache lingered. Not for Melissa, but for the man he used to be before everything shattered. Sometimes he wondered if that version of himself had died the night she walked out, or if he had simply been reborn into someone harder, colder, but truer. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, Melissa's world was unraveling. Her second marriage had imploded spectacularly when her husband, a wealthy developer named Richard, was exposed for embezzlement. The scandal stripped her of the luxury she had traded her family for. Friends vanished, her social circles dissolved, and soon she found herself living in a small apartment with fading furniture and unpaid bills. For the first time, she was invisible. She thought of Daniel often, at first with resentment, later with regret. She'd tell herself he must still be the same struggling mechanic, still clinging to the life she escaped. But late one night, while scrolling through the internet, she stumbled upon an article titled, "The Man Who Rebuilt His Life from the Ground Up," Daniel Carter's Solar Revolution. Her breath caught as she stared at the photo. Daniel in a dark suit, older, stronger, confident, standing beside a company logo bearing their family name. Behind him were pictures of his team, smiling, proud, alive. And beside him, in another photo, were 4 young adults who looked both familiar and foreign. Their children. Melissa's hands trembled as she scrolled through the article, reading about his achievements, his charity work, his leadership. Every word felt like a knife, each sentence an echo of what she had abandoned. The man she had dismissed as weak had become everything she once claimed to want. She stared at the screen until tears blurred her vision. Regret came not as a sharp pain, but as a slow, suffocating weight that pressed on her chest. For the first time in years, she whispered his name aloud. Daniel. The sound felt strange in her mouth, like a prayer she no longer deserved to say. The next morning, she drove past the new Carter Solar Solutions headquarters. She didn't stop, just parked across the street and watched through the windshield as employees entered, laughing and chatting. Then she saw him. Daniel stepped out of the building, phone in hand, sunlight glinting off his wedding band. No longer a ring of marriage, but a quiet symbol of endurance. He looked different now. His hair was flecked with gray, his shoulders broader, his face etched with calm authority. He exuded a quiet power, not the loud arrogance of wealth, but the steady grace of a man who had earned every ounce of his peace. Melissa felt her throat tighten. She thought about getting out of the car, walking up to him, saying something, anything, but fear kept her frozen. What could she possibly say? "I'm sorry." The words sounded too small for the damage she'd done. So she watched him turn and walk away, surrounded by the kind of respect she had chased all her life, but never truly earned. That night, Melissa opened a bottle of cheap wine in her small apartment and stared out at the rain, the same Seattle rain that had once beaten against their old house. She realized that for all her running, she'd never escaped anything. She had traded love for luxury and lost both. Daniel's transformation was complete. Hers had just begun, though it came too late. Back in his home, Daniel sat by the fire, unaware that the past had just circled back. He held an old family photo in his hands, not to mourn, but to remember who he used to be. He didn't know Melissa had seen him that day, didn't sense the storm quietly gathering on the horizon. For now, all he knew was peace, and peace, he'd learned, was the rarest form of victory. Melissa's life began to collapse in slow motion, the kind of ruin that did not arrive with explosions or headlines, but with a quiet, relentless erosion of everything she had built on deception. After Richard's indictment for fraud, she became collateral damage in his scandal. The newspapers printed her name next to his, implying guilt by association. Former friends in her social circle deleted her number, stopped inviting her to charity events, and whispered about her over glasses of wine. She went from being the woman everyone envied to the one they pitied. The penthouse she once boasted about was sold to cover legal fees. Soon she was living in a 2-bedroom apartment that smelled of damp carpet and stale air. The silence in that place was suffocating. There were no phone calls, no laughter, no luxury, only the echo of her own regrets. She tried to find work again in marketing, but her reputation was tarnished. Interviews always started politely and ended with the same line. "We'll be in touch." They never were. At night, she would stare at the ceiling, wondering how she had arrived here. There had been a time when she believed she was destined for more than the life she had with Daniel, a life of mortgages, bills, and exhaustion. She had convinced herself that ambition justified betrayal, but ambition without integrity had left her hollow. The mirror became her harshest enemy. She could see time's quiet cruelty, fine lines that makeup couldn't hide, a weariness in her eyes that no amount of wine could soften. The confidence that once drew people to her had curdled into bitterness. She told herself she didn't need anyone, yet every night she found herself scrolling through old photos she'd saved secretly, pictures of Daniel holding baby Grace, of Liam's first baseball game, of their Christmas mornings. She had left that life behind, but it had never left her. The final blow came when she discovered that Richard had remarried a woman 10 years younger than her, and that he'd moved to California, taking with him what little remained of their shared assets. Melissa didn't cry. She just sat at the kitchen table, staring at the eviction notice taped to her door, feeling the numbness spread through her chest like frost. That evening, she took a bus across the city and found herself standing outside the old neighborhood where she and Daniel had once lived. The house looked different now, painted, remodeled, alive. She hesitated at the gate, her heart pounding with a strange mix of fear and nostalgia. Through the living room window, she saw movement. Daniel, older but strikingly composed, sitting by the fire with a woman's laughter echoing faintly from inside. Her breath caught. For a moment she wondered if he had remarried. Then she saw Emma walk into the room smiling, followed by Noah carrying a tray of mugs. They were all there. Liam too, tall and confident, talking animatedly. Grace sat beside Daniel, her head resting on his shoulder. The sight hit Melissa harder than any betrayal she had ever suffered. Her family, once fractured and small, was now whole again, without her. They looked happy, not the kind of happiness bought with money, but the kind that grows in the soil of forgiveness and shared pain. Her knees felt weak. She stepped back, heart racing, tears blurring her vision. She had imagined this moment for years, had fantasized about returning as the prodigal mother, welcomed back with open arms. But seeing them like this, so complete without her, she understood the truth. She was no longer part of their story. She turned away before anyone could see her, walking aimlessly through the rain. The city around her seemed unfamiliar, filled with strangers and neon reflections. She ducked into a small cafe, the kind of place she would have once considered beneath her, and ordered a coffee she couldn't afford. Her hands trembled as she lifted the cup. Around her, people laughed, worked, lived. She felt invisible. For the first time, she wanted to see Daniel, not to rekindle anything, but to apologize, to acknowledge the damage she'd done. The next morning, she found his company address online. She stood across the street, watching employees come and go, afraid to cross that invisible boundary between past and present. Then she saw him. Daniel emerged from the glass doors wearing a navy suit, phone pressed to his ear. He looked calm, commanding, and impossibly distant. When he laughed, the sound carried across the street and hit her like a memory. He wasn't the man she had left. He was the man he was always meant to be. She tried to step forward, but her courage failed. A group of employees greeted him as Mr. Carter, and Melissa realized with sharp clarity that she was no longer Mrs. Carter. She was just Melissa, the woman who walked away. The weight of that reality crushed her. That night, she wrote him a letter. She didn't know if she would ever deliver it, but she needed to write it. "Dear Daniel," it began, "there are no words that can undo what I did. I thought I was chasing happiness, but I was only running from myself. You were always enough. I just couldn't see it then. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that not a day goes by that I don't think of you and the children. I hope they're happy. I hope you are too." She folded the letter carefully, placed it in an envelope, and tucked it inside her drawer. Days passed and she never mailed it. Some part of her knew that showing up might reopen wounds that had already healed. Still, the thought of facing him gnawed at her. She couldn't move on until she saw him one last time, even if it meant facing the judgment she deserved. And fate, as it often did, would grant her that chance, but not in the way she expected, because soon an invitation would arrive at her door. It wasn't addressed to her, but to Melissa Carter, forwarded accidentally from an old address. It was an elegant envelope embossed with gold lettering. Inside was a formal card. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the 45th birthday of Daniel Carter." The words shimmered under the light. Melissa's hands shook as she read them. Her heart thudded against her ribs. 12 years after walking away, she had been given the chance to see what her absence had cost. She didn't know it yet, but that night, Daniel's birthday, would become the moment her past collided brutally with his peace, the moment when the family she abandoned would finally face her again. Melissa stared at the invitation for a long time, her fingers tracing the embossed gold letters as if they might vanish if she blinked. Daniel's name gleamed under the light, strong, defined, steady, so different from the fragile memory she carried of him. The envelope had been misdelivered, sent to her old address, but she took it as a sign, though she wasn't sure from whom. For days she couldn't sleep. She'd sit by the window at night, listening to the hum of traffic, replaying old conversations in her head. The night she left, the look in his eyes when he realized she wasn't coming back, the way Grace had cried in the doorway. The memories came like ghosts, merciless and unrelenting. She told herself she would go, not to intrude, but to apologize, to see with her own eyes the life that had continued without her, to face the consequences of her choices. The night of the party arrived with gentle rain, the kind that soaked everything slowly. She stood outside the event hall in a simple navy dress she'd bought from a thrift store, her hair pulled back neatly, makeup light but trembling on her skin. Through the large windows she could see people moving inside, laughing, embracing, glasses raised under soft golden light. A live band played something mellow, timeless. She hesitated at the door, her reflection caught in the glass. A woman older, smaller, almost unrecognizable to herself. For a moment she thought about leaving, but then she saw him. Daniel stood near the stage, surrounded by his children. He was wearing a dark suit, tailored and confident, his silver-flecked hair catching the light. He smiled, an easy, natural smile that reached his eyes. It wasn't forced or hollow like the ones she used to know. It was peace. Melissa's chest tightened. She wanted to turn away, to protect herself from the truth, but her legs carried her forward. The receptionist at the entrance looked confused as she approached. "Ma'am, do you have an invitation?" Melissa held up the card with shaking hands. "I'm family," she managed to whisper. The woman nodded politely and let her in. Every step inside felt heavier than the last. Conversations paused as faces turned toward her, some curious, some startled. She saw Liam first. He was tall, poised, the reflection of Daniel's steadiness. His expression froze the moment he recognized her. Emma's eyes widened. Noah's jaw tightened. Grace looked pale, uncertain. Melissa could barely breathe. Daniel turned following their gaze. For a long moment no one spoke. The air between them seemed to thicken. "Melissa," he said at last, his voice calm but firm, not warm, not angry, just factual, like naming a weather condition. "You came." "I didn't mean to intrude," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "I just wanted to—" "To what?" Noah interrupted sharply. His tone carried 12 years of silence and unanswered questions. "See what you left behind?" "Noah," Daniel said quietly, but the damage was done. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. I know I don't deserve to be here, she whispered. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. The room had gone silent. Only the faint music filled the background. Liam's voice broke it. Sorry for what exactly? For leaving Dad to raise us alone? For disappearing? For pretending we didn't exist? Liam, Daniel warned again, but his eldest shook his head. No, Dad. She needs to hear it. He turned to her. You don't get to just walk back into our lives because you suddenly feel guilty. Melissa's lip quivered. You're right, she said softly. I have no right. I just needed to see you. All of you. I needed to know you're okay. Emma spoke then, her tone softer but edged with pain. We're more than okay, Mom. We learned to be. But not because of you. Because of him. She nodded toward Daniel. Melissa turned to look at him. He hadn't moved. His eyes were steady, unreadable. You did a good job, she said, her voice breaking. Better than I ever could have. Daniel sighed quietly, glancing at his children before stepping closer. Why now, Melissa? He asked. 12 years. Why come back now? Because I lost everything, she admitted, tears falling freely. Because I thought I had it all and ended up with nothing. And when I saw you, saw what you became, what you built, I realized what I threw away. Daniel's gaze softened slightly, not out of pity, but understanding. You didn't just throw away a marriage, he said quietly. You threw away a family that would have loved you no matter what. I know, she whispered, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. The silence that followed was heavy, almost unbearable. Grace stepped forward then, her voice gentle but firm. Mom, she said softly, I used to dream you'd come back. I thought maybe you were lost, that one day you'd walk through the door and everything would be okay again. But now I think maybe you were gone long before you left. Melissa covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. Grace looked at her father, then back at her mother. We forgive you, she said. At least I do. But forgiveness doesn't mean things go back to how they were. Daniel's hand rested on Grace's shoulder, pride flickering in his eyes. She's right, he said, turning back to Melissa. We've forgiven you. We had to move on. But there's no space left here for the past. Melissa nodded slowly, her tears quieting. I understand, she said. I didn't come for that. I just needed to tell you in person that I see now. Everything. What you gave. What I destroyed. Daniel studied her for a long time, then offered a small nod. Then you've said what you needed to say. He turned toward his children. Come on, he said softly. Let's give her a moment. But before walking away, he paused beside her. Melissa, he said gently, I don't hate you. I never did. I just stopped waiting for you. With that, he walked back toward the stage where his children followed him. The music resumed, laughter slowly returning as the crowd absorbed what had happened. Melissa stood alone near the doorway, watching as her family, her once family, rejoined the celebration. She saw Daniel laugh at something Noah said, saw Emma hug Grace, saw Liam raise a toast. They looked complete, radiant. She smiled through her tears. For the first time in 12 years, she felt something close to peace, even if it came wrapped in sorrow. As she stepped outside, the rain had begun again, soft, steady, familiar. She tilted her face upward, letting it wash away the remnants of her makeup, her pride, her illusions. Behind her through the glass, her family glowed in warm light. She turned away, walking into the night. Her past was behind her now, and though she had lost everything that mattered, she carried with her the truth, the one thing she had spent her whole life running from. The night of Daniel's birthday should have ended with laughter and quiet music, but long after the guests had left and the last of the lights had dimmed, the tension that Melissa's appearance had stirred still lingered in the air. Daniel sat on the porch, his jacket draped over the railing, the rain now a soft mist that whispered through the darkness. Inside, his children cleaned up in silence, each of them heavy with emotions they didn't know how to name. The confrontation that began at the party wasn't finished. It hung like a shadow between them all, waiting to be faced. Emma was the first to speak. Dad, she said quietly, stepping onto the porch. Are you okay? Daniel gave a faint smile. I'm fine, he said, though his voice betrayed exhaustion. She's gone now. Emma nodded, sitting beside him. It's strange, she said. Seeing her again, I thought I'd hate her, but all I felt was pity. Daniel looked at his daughter, proud and steady, her eyes soft but wounded. That's not weakness, he said. That's strength. Anger keeps you chained to the past. Pity means you've outgrown it. Inside, the others were less composed. Noah paced the living room, his fists clenched. I can't believe she showed up here, acting like she deserves forgiveness, he said sharply, after everything she did. Liam, calm but firm, replied, She didn't ask for forgiveness. She already knows she lost it. That doesn't make it better, Noah muttered. Grace sat quietly, her eyes on the rain outside. She looked so small, she whispered, like someone who doesn't belong anywhere. Her voice cracked. I wanted to hate her too, but she's still my mom. The room fell silent. Even Noah stopped pacing. They all looked at her, youngest, yet somehow the wisest among them. Daniel re-entered, wiping rain from his sleeves. Your mother made her choices, he said, but so did we. We chose to keep living. That's why we're standing here tonight. Noah turned toward him, his voice breaking. I just don't get it, Dad. How could she leave us? How do you forgive something like that? Daniel sighed, his gaze distant. You don't forgive for them. You do it for yourself. Otherwise, the anger eats you alive. He looked around at his children, each one carrying their own piece of the wound. She's already punished enough, he said softly. We don't need to add to it. The next morning, Melissa came back. Daniel was in the office reviewing contracts when his assistant buzzed in. Sir, there's a woman here asking to see you. She says her name is Melissa Carter. He froze, then nodded. Send her in. When she entered, she looked different, tired, disheveled, yet strangely calm. I'm sorry, she said before he could speak. I shouldn't have come to your party. It wasn't fair. Daniel studied her for a long moment. What do you want, Melissa? To apologize properly, she said. Not in front of everyone, just between us. He gestured to the chair across from him. Go ahead. She sat, twisting her hands together. When I left, she began, her voice unsteady, I told myself I was chasing happiness. I thought money and freedom would make me feel alive, but all it did was make me hollow. I blamed you for everything, for the job loss, for the pressure, for the boredom. But the truth is, I was the problem. I was afraid of ordinary life, afraid that love wouldn't be enough. Daniel said nothing, his face unreadable. Melissa's voice broke. You were good to me, Daniel, better than I ever deserved. I see that now, and I see what I did to our children. I can't undo it, but I needed you to know that I'm sorry, not for losing you, but for becoming someone you had to recover from. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel leaned forward, his hands folded. I appreciate your honesty, he said quietly, but you don't owe me anything. I've moved on. I know, she said softly. I saw it. I saw them. All of them. They're beautiful, strong. You did what I couldn't. We did it together, he said gently. Even if you weren't there. Tears filled her eyes. You still protect me, she whispered, even after everything. Daniel's gaze softened. No, I protect them, and part of protecting them means not letting the past poison the present. She nodded slowly. I understand. Then she hesitated. Would it be too much to ask if I could see them one last time? Properly? Daniel looked away, conflicted. He thought of his children, of their pain and their strength. They need to decide that, he said finally. That evening he gathered them at the house. Your mother came by, he told them. The room fell silent. She wants to see you again. I told her the choice isn't mine. They exchanged glances. Emma was the first to nod. I'll see her, she said softly. I need to. Liam agreed quietly. Grace looked relieved. Noah hesitated, anger flickering in his eyes before fading into resignation. Fine. There was nothing left for her here but memories. The cafe where she had met her children had already closed, and she found herself staring at the empty chairs through the window, imagining their faces one last time. For the first time in years, she didn't feel bitterness or jealousy, only gratitude that they had turned out so well, despite her absence. She thought of Daniel, his calm, his forgiveness, his ability to rebuild from nothing. He had won the kind of victory that didn't need applause. She smiled faintly, wiped her eyes, and boarded the bus. Through the fog glass, she looked out at the city fading into the distance, whispering a final goodbye that no one would hear. Back at the house, the fire crackled softly. Daniel poured another glass of wine and stepped onto the porch. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of cedar and rain. He looked up at the sky, at the faint glimmer of stars breaking through the clouds. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to imagine the future. Not the one he had lost, but the one he had built. Maybe one day he would love again. Maybe not. Either way, he was whole. The next morning, Daniel woke early and drove to the company headquarters. Employees greeted him warmly, some waving as he passed. He walked through the bright, sunlit lobby to his office, where a framed quote hung behind his desk. It read, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." He'd chosen it years ago, but today, for the first time, he truly understood it. At noon, Grace stopped by with lunch. She had his eyes and Melissa's smile, the one thing about her mother Daniel could still love without pain. They sat on the balcony overlooking the city. "You think she'll ever come back?" she asked between bites. Daniel shook his head. "If she does, it'll be for herself, not for us. And that's okay." Grace nodded. "I hope she finds peace." "So do I." The wind stirred softly, lifting the edges of their napkins. In that simple moment, father and daughter sharing lunch above the city, Daniel realized that redemption wasn't about changing the past. It was about refusing to let it define the future. That night, as the lights of Seattle shimmered in the distance, Daniel stood by the window once more. The house was quiet, the air cool and clean. Somewhere out there, Melissa was starting over, and he wished her well. Not because he still loved her, but because love, once real, doesn't vanish. It simply transforms. He raised his glass slightly, a silent toast to everything they had survived. 12 years ago, he had been a broken man abandoned with 4 children. Tonight, he was the father of a strong, united family, the builder of a life forged in fire. The rain began again, tapping softly against the glass, steady and familiar. Daniel smiled to himself, then turned off the light. Inside, the home glowed with warmth, laughter lingering faintly in the walls. Outside, the storm moved on, gentle and endless, washing the world clean. It was over. It had been over for a long time, and now at last, it felt that way.